All right. Well, as we head into our message, I actually want to begin by asking you a question. I want to know how many of you would like the following to be said of you. Would you like to be happier? Would you like to have lower levels of depression and anxiety? Would you like to have healthier relationships? Would you like to have a higher life expectancy? And would you like to be known as someone who laughs more? Anyone want that to be true of themselves? Anyone in the room? There's a lot of hands going up. I think we all would like that to be true of ourselves, right? Well, the good news is that I really believe that if you take what I want to share with you today and you actually apply that to your life, that this will be the fruit of it. Now, I'm not being arrogant here. I'm not trying to say that I've got life all figured out, that I have all the answers, that I'm some sort of guru that can just sort your life out. All I aim to do this morning is just simply walk you through what the scriptures say about if we obey what Jesus has to say, that this will be the fruit of our lives. You see, we are actually in the middle of a series which we began last week called Mastering Money. And we're in this series because we want to be people who know how to actually manage our money. And the whole goal of this series is simply to just help you learn how to handle your finances in the way that it aligns with what Jesus says, in the way that actually benefits you the most. Now, let me just say right from the beginning, I'm not about to tell you that if you give lots of money to the church, that you will get lots of money, that you will have lots of great health, you'll never have any health issues, your life will be super blessed, that everything will go really well, and you'll never have any problems. And that all of this will be a sign of God's blessing on your life because you have been obedient to Him. That is what we call the prosperity gospel. It isn't biblical, and let's face it, it's just obnoxious. That is not where we're going this morning. In fact, actually, I mentioned last week that we have actually, we've wanted to do a series on money for quite a few years now, but we've actually kind of been avoiding it. And a big reason why we've been avoiding it is the fact that we know that many people have abused this topic. Many churches, many church leaders have actually used this, misused this topic and misinterpreted it or just preached false messages in order for their own self-gain, in order to fund the church for their own needs. And so the reason why we're actually doing this series now is actually because our finances are actually in the best state they have ever been. Giving is higher than they have ever been, and our bank balance is better than it's ever been, and we are actually ahead of our budget right now. And so this is not a campaign to try and get your money off you and into the church. That is not our motive in why we're doing this. So why are we doing a series on money? Well, we're doing a series on money because Jesus talked on money. In fact, Jesus actually had a lot to say about money. He taught and he understood that our relationship with money has a very close relationship with our relationship with God. See, Jesus understood that how we handle our finances and how we handle our worldly possessions has a direct link between our walk with God. In fact, he actually said this in Matthew 6:24. We looked at this last week. He said, "No one can serve two masters, for you will hate one and love the other. You will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money." Jesus understood that the way that we handle our money, the relationship that we have with our money, is actually a defining make or break issue in our walk with God. He understood that actually money, perhaps above anything else, has power to turn our hearts away from God and actually become the central focus of our lives and actually lead us towards distraction and destruction. In other words, Jesus is saying that either we learn to master our money or our money will master us. And so the aim of this series is to do just that, to look at what the scriptures say about how we can handle our money in a way that we are mastering it so that it actually bears fruit in our lives, so that it is actually a blessing to both us and to other people, rather than it being something that brings destruction to both us and other people, and ultimately leads us to becoming a slave to money. So last week, we kicked this off by looking at the trap of the love of money, how we can easily fall into this trap of just our hearts being set on money and expecting money to be the thing that provides for our needs, expecting money to be where ultimate satisfaction and pleasure and enjoyment is found. And we looked at how ultimately this comes down to an issue of trust. Where we choose to put our trust is of eternal significance when it comes to our finances. Either we can put our money, our trust in finances and say what is in our bank balance and what we have, what we own, is what is ultimately going to provide for me and is ultimately going to lead to satisfaction and enjoyment and pleasure. Or we can look at Jesus and go to Jesus for those things. And this is what, as we looked at last week, this is what Paul was addressing in his letter to Timothy. He says this: teach those who are rich in this world not to be proud and not to trust in their money, which is so unreliable. Their trust should be in God, who richly gives us all we need for our enjoyment. See, Paul was saying not to put our trust in finances. He's not saying that money is bad, that we shouldn't have any. He's not even saying that we shouldn't have wealth. He's just saying that is not where we put our trust. We don't put our trust in what we have. We put it in Jesus. And that Jesus is ultimately the one who wants to provide for our needs. He's the one who wants to take care of us. And not just our practical needs, but actually the things that we need for our enjoyment as well. But Paul doesn't actually stop there. Actually, he goes on in the next verse to give us one of the tools that we can use to actually live this out. And before we put it up on the screen, I just want to give a bit of context to this letter to Timothy. See, the Apostle Paul, during his missionary life, one of the locations that he went to is a city called Ephesus. In Ephesus, he planted a church there, which he visited multiple times and spent a lot of time there discipling the locals and helping them to grow in their faith. But when he realized that he wasn't going to be able to return to Ephesus, he actually wrote this letter to Timothy in order for Timothy to visit Ephesus and be a messenger on his behalf in order to deal with some of the issues that had begun to arise there. Now, Ephesus, geographically, it was a port city. And as such, it meant that it was a hub for a lot of trade, a lot of worldwide trade. And so people from all over the world were coming to do trade there and to move on to other areas of the country. And so naturally it had an area where it was very multicultural, and there were a lot of different religions and backgrounds and beliefs and views. And it was also just a city that was literally centered around the idea of getting as much wealth as you possibly could. It was a wealthy city. And this idea of wealth and the pursuit of wealth had actually begun to creep into the church. And this is one of the issues that Paul was trying to address. And so that's why he's teaching them not to put their trust in that, not to focus their attention on what they can amass for themselves, not to pursue worldly wealth, but instead to do this. He says, tell them to use their money to do good. They should be rich in good works and generous to those in need, always being ready to share with others. So Paul is telling them, rather than adopt the customs of this world, where the focus is on the pursuit of money, the love of money, instead, use that money to do good. Use it for the benefit of other people. He says, rather than being rich in this world, in worldly things, be rich in good works. And then he says that we are to be generous to those in need. Now, Paul here is actually giving us one of the antidotes to the love of money, which is generosity. See, generosity is a powerful antidote to the love of money in our hearts because it actually shifts our focus. It enables our focus to shift away from ourselves and onto other people. See, when we have a love of money, it all becomes about what I need, what I can get, how can I increase my wealth, how can I increase or better my security, what can I get that brings me satisfaction and enjoyment and pleasure. But when we have a focus on generosity, it shifts that away from ourselves and onto how can I benefit other people. How can I meet the needs of other people around me? And that very nature of just being generosity, that very nature is shifting our focus and automatically forces us to let go of the love of money. So generosity is a powerful antidote for the love of money. So generosity is actively seeking to use the resources that God has given you for the benefit of others. It's using your resources to find ways to administer God's love and passion and compassion and provision to other people. In fact, that word there, generosity, in its original Greek is eumatodete. I'm really glad I never had to learn Greek because I don't think I could do it. Eumatodidotos. You can look it up yourself. It literally means willing to share or ready to impart or to give with a liberal attitude. Those who are generous are people who are always willing to give away what they have. They're actively seeking opportunities to give away and bless other people. They're people who give with a liberal attitude. They do it joyfully and cheerfully and abundantly. This is the kind of people that we want to become. These are the kind of people that we as a church are called to be. And this is something that actually marked the early church. This is something that was, as you look throughout Scripture, particularly in the New Testament, you see example after example after example of the early church living out this lavish generosity to the point where it actually says that nobody had need, that nobody lacked anything. I mean, that's an incredible thing to think about. There's one example in Acts chapter 4 of a man named Joseph who was nicknamed Barnabas, that means son of encouragement. And he literally sold an entire field to take that money and give it to the apostles so that they could distribute it to the poor. I mean, just think about that for a moment. That is not a small act of generosity. That is lavish generosity. And if you think about it, that wasn't just a one-time thing. See, that field would have represented financial security to Joseph. It would have been a source of income for him for years to come. It would have been part of his children's inheritance, guaranteeing their security. And yet, he was willing to completely lay it down for the sake of others. That's such a beautiful picture of generosity. Can you imagine living in a culture like that? Living in a culture where people live out generosity at such a level that there is not a single person who goes without. There's not a single person that has need. See, generosity allows us to sow joy and life and provision into other people. I think we can all think of a time, right, where we've been blessed by somebody else's generosity and the impact that that has had on our hearts and on our lives. I mentioned last week one example of this where we were due to go on holiday and we had some bills that went out that we weren't expecting, and so we found ourselves in a situation where we had no money in our bank account, and we had 2 cars with empty petrols, both empty tanks, and we needed both of those cars in order to be able to get on holiday. And it came to literally the day before the holiday, and we still didn't have any money until someone who didn't even know our need reached out to us and said, "Hey, I want to just bless you with a gift for your holiday so you can really enjoy it. Here's £1,500. Such an incredible blessing. It's such an amazing moment when we get to experience God's provision through someone else's generosity. I want to share another example of this. As many of you know, and probably are sick of hearing by now, last October, our home was destroyed in a flood. A flood happened when the river near our house burst its banks, and there was about 4 foot of water in the house. We lost pretty much everything on the ground floor of our house. And I mentioned last week how, as part of the insurance process, we had to itemize everything and make a note of its value and so on. And that helped me to realize just how much stuff that I had amassed that I really didn't need, that I thought I did. But it also highlighted all the things that I really do need and my family need just to function here in life in the UK. You know, we needed a car in order to get around. Both of our cars were completely destroyed in the flood. We needed something just to be able to do school runs and basic things, grocery shops, things like that. School shoes, school bags, coats, cutlery, cooking things. Think about everything that you need in a kitchen in order just to provide a meal for your family. Towels, hoovers, washing machines, dryers, fridge freezers. The list goes on of all these things that kind of are basic things that we need in our day and culture. And we didn't really have any savings, and it was going to be quite a while before we got any sort of a payout from the insurance company. And so what do you do in that situation? Well, this is where I get to brag on so many of you in this room, as well as many other people outside this room. Because the generosity that we began to experience in that moment was just breathtaking. Now, we had life groups that took up offerings to give money to us. We had Katrina, when the flood happened, my wife was actually away at a conference with a gathering of just different Antioch leaders from different missionaries and church planters all over the world. And they took some time to take up an offering to give to us as well. Many of those I'd never even met, still haven't met. We had people open up their homes for us to come and stay while we tried to figure things out. We had people donate just things that they had to help us kind of recover some of those items that we lost. We had an insane amount of meals cooked for us, to the point where we actually had to put a stop to it because we couldn't eat it quick enough. I was going to come back to church the size of a balloon, a hot air balloon that just couldn't fit in the door. We had people just give toys and books and teddies and things like that for our kids so that they could just have some things to play with and enjoy. I cannot tell you how much that meant to me and my family. In one of our darkest moments of our lives, we were able to still rejoice in God's goodness because of the generosity of his people. Now, we all love to have a story like that, right? We all love the way that to have those stories of how God has met with us and provided for our needs. And I can think of so many more stories like that from my life and stories from other people's lives. I can tell you stories of how God has, through the generosity of his church, has given cars to people. I've actually experienced that one myself more than once. I've had... I know of a church planter in the US who's moved to one of the most expensive cities in America, and particularly for housing. House prices are insanely high there, and rent is insanely high there, and they were in a difficult situation. And so some friends of theirs kind of shared the word to kind of raise some money for them just to help them out a bit, and they raised, literally within the space of a week, enough money for them to put a deposit down on a house in the most expensive city in America, or one of the most expensive cities. That's lavish generosity, and these stories are so incredible. I've heard of people being given checks and cash for the exact amount of money they needed to pay a bill that they couldn't pay. We all want these stories to happen in our lives where we encounter God's incredible goodness in that way. But none of it is possible unless his church are willing to live out a lifestyle of generosity. Unless the church is willing to master their finances in such a way that they are willing to be a blessing to the people around them. If you think about it, all these stories, like the fruit of it is always joy. It was joy that I experienced when I was able to kind of replace some of those things that we lost because of the generosity of the church. It was joy that we got to experience when we were able to fill our car tank with petrol and go on our holiday because of the generosity of someone else. The fruit is always joy, and it leads to worshiping Jesus and being trusting deeper in his provision. It increases faith. This is the fruit of generosity, that we get to release God's kingdom into other people's lives. We want to be the kind of people who know how to trust in Jesus when the cupboards are bare and we have no money. But we also want to be the kind of people who fill other people's cupboards when they are empty and they have no money. That is the kind of church that I want Antioch to be. The kind of church that lives out a lavish generosity to where nobody has want. This is the beauty of generosity. It's actually, I believe, one of God's primary ways that he administers his provision, his relief, his love and justice and compassion to his people. He does it through acts of generosity from others in the community. We get to partner with God in what he is doing in other people's lives. We get to be part of the story of other people experiencing God and actually being drawn closer into relationship with him as a result. We get to partner with Jesus as we build other people's faith. But the fruit of generosity is not just for the receiver. The fruit of generosity is actually for the giver as well. So if we go back to 1 Timothy 6:18, he continues and he says, "Tell them to use their money to do good. They should be rich in good works and generous to those in need, always being ready to share with others. By doing this, they will be storing up their treasure as a good foundation for the future so that they may experience true life." So Paul goes on to say that by being generous, that we actually store up treasure that leads to a true life, to the fullest of life. Now, how is that actually possible? Firstly, he's telling us not to store up treasure, and then he's telling us that by giving it away, we store up treasure. How does that even work? I mean, think about it. It doesn't really actually make any sense. You see, if we're giving away, he's not asking us to invest in a bank. He's not asking us to invest in shares or something that might give us a return on our investment. He's asking us to give to those who are in need, the ones who actually are not able to repay us. In fact, actually, Scripture specifically says to give without expecting anything in return. So how does this make sense? How does this work? How is it possible that by giving and living a lifestyle of generosity, that we actually get to store up treasure? Well, many people actually misinterpret this, and this is often where we get some of the prosperity gospel. People take this and they think, well, if I give lots, then God will bless me with lots. Now, if I give financially, then God will give me lots of money. I'll get all the things that I want. I'll not have any issues of life. They take this as a principle that those who are wealthy, those who are doing well and successful, that is a symbol of God's blessing on their lives because they have been faithful. But that's not what Paul is getting at here. Now, don't get me wrong. There are times when we choose to give that God responds with blessing us in a material way. There's times I can tell you from my own life where I have chosen to be generous and to give away to others, and God has, in return, blessed me with even more. There's times I can tell you so many stories of where that has played out in people's lives. So it's definitely a principle that sometimes Jesus does bless us financially or with material things when we choose to bless others financially or with material things. But that's not always the case. In fact, actually, being honest with you, from my own experience, I found it's those who have the least that tend to be the most generous. Those who have the least tend to be the most willing to give away. And so if having lots is the sign of generosity, then that doesn't really make sense. So Paul here is actually referring to something different. What exactly is he referring to? Well, he's actually quoting the statement of Jesus in that same teaching that we looked at right at the beginning of this message, the Sermon on the Mount. And I want to take a moment just to look at that passage. It comes right before the verse that we looked at earlier. It says this: "Don't store up treasures here on earth, where moths eat them and rust destroys them, and where thieves break in and steal. Store your treasures in heaven, where moths and rust cannot destroy them, and thieves do not break in and steal." So Paul, you can see here, is saying the same thing that Jesus said, store up treasures. But Jesus actually has an extra bit on the end. He says, store up treasures in heaven. See, Paul and Jesus, they're saying that when we give away generosity, when we are generous to other people, we're actually storing up a different kind of treasure to what the world offers. We're storing up a treasure that can never be taken away from us, something that we will always carry with us. So what exactly is that treasure? What is this heavenly treasure that he's referring to? He goes on to say this: wherever your treasure is, there the desires of your heart will be also. Jesus says, where your treasure is, there your heart is. Now, we often interpret this as, we put our money where we're most passionate about. But actually, if you look at the wording of it, it's actually the other way around. Where you put your money is where your heart will be. In other words, where you put your heart will follow your money. Where you would choose to invest is actually where you lead your heart. And so, to think about it, I'll give you an example. If you were to tomorrow take a significant chunk of your money and invest it into the shares of a company, you're naturally going to start to be more interested in how well that company's doing, right? You're going to start actually taking more of an interest in how they're operating and the decisions that they're making and how they're doing. And actually, all those things will then start to affect the way that you think, and it can even affect your emotions, particularly when they're underperforming, right? Likewise, if you choose to invest in a child in an impoverished country, that is automatically then going to start to shift your focus to where you become naturally more interested in what is going on in that person's life. Your heart for them, for the poor, automatically begins to increase, and compassion towards the poor will actually increase with it. This is what Jesus is referring to. He's saying that it's not that we get to have these earthly treasures, although, again, sometimes that is how God blesses us, but actually, more importantly, that we actually have an experience where we are transformed ourselves from the inside, and we begin to store up heavenly treasures in our lives. As we put our money into places, our heart begins to align with what is in God's place. When we put our money into generosity, our hearts automatically begin to align with God's heart, and we begin to experience Him in fresh ways. I like to think of it as where we invest our money is like the steering wheel for our heart. When we choose to invest it in the things of God, it actually steers us towards God and His things, His blessing and His purposes in our lives. So Jesus and Paul here, when they say that we are to store up treasures in heaven, they're not referring to storing up lots of wealth, although, again, it's not bad to have savings and things like that. He's just saying that actually, as you give out generosity, you are storing up heavenly things into your life. You actually get to experience the things of heaven in your daily life. This then becomes that you are able to experience the fullness of life, not because you have worldly wealth, not because you have special things and that you have lots of money, but simply because you get to experience joy as you give away to others and you get to see the joy that it creates in them. You get to experience the fullness of life, not because you have lots of things, but because when you give it away, rather than hold on to it, you get to a place of peace as you learn to transition your trust from worldly things into Jesus. So that when the difficult times come in your own life, you're able to stay strong and stand on the rock of Jesus. You get to experience the fullness of life, not because you have lots of worldly things, but because as you give it away, you experience a deep sense of contentment as you begin to recognize that you've been blessed to the point where you can bless others. So this actually leads me back to our opening question, the statement that I made. See, there are actually multiple studies that have been done now that show a direct link between people's generosity and the quality of their life. And what they've found is that actually, consistently, the more people are generous, the better their quality of life is. In fact, there was one study that was done in America of 2,000 people plus, where they just did a whole series of interviews and different things. And one of the things that they found was exactly this. And this is a summary that they said from their findings. They said, "This wealth of evidence reveals a consistent link between demonstrating generosity and leading a better life. More generous people are happier, suffer fewer illnesses and injuries, live with a greater sense of purpose, and experience less depression." See, the fruit of generosity is that it transforms us from the inside out. And you think about it. Think about the most generous person you know, or the most generous people you know. How would you rate them on these things? I mean, I know from my own personal experience that they tend to be the most joyful. They tend to be the most peaceful. They tend to be the most content. They tend to laugh more. That's one of the things that came from this study, is that literally more generous people laugh more. Generosity actually changes us from the inside out, because we're not storing up treasure on earth, we're actually storing up heavenly treasures. If you think about it, all these things are qualities of heaven. These are all qualities that we get to look forward to in eternity. This is the fruit in our own lives as we live out a lifestyle of generosity. Now, it's not saying that you'll never get sick. It's not saying that you'll never get down or that you'll have a bad day or anything like that. It's not saying that life will always be good and perfect and easy. It's just simply saying that your outlook on life shifts to where you see things through the lens of Jesus, and to where your foundation is put on Jesus, to where we actually get to experience those things because he is actually the master of our finances. Hopefully, by now, I've convinced you that the best sort of life you can live is a life of generosity, because of the blessing that it has on other people and the impact it has on our own lives. But where do we go from here, right? What does it actually look like to live this out? Well, let me just say from the beginning that a big act of generosity done every now and again actually doesn't make you a generous person. It doesn't actually have that much of an impact. In fact, the summary goes on to say this: Smith and Davidson also show, however, that to achieve a better life, a person must practice generosity regularly. Random acts of kindness are not enough. So they found in their study that actually it's those who are consistent, those who are intentional to be generous, are actually the ones who experience this change in their life. They're the ones that actually begin to experience greater happiness, greater contentment, and all those other things. It's actually not about the amount that you give. Often we think of generosity, and the more generous you are, the bigger you give. But actually that's not the case. The more generous that you are, the more intentionally and the more consistently you give. And this is actually great news, because it means it's available to everybody. So it doesn't matter whether you're rich or poor, whether you have an abundance or whether you have very little. We're all in a position where we get to enjoy the blessing of generosity. See, I actually think one of the biggest lies that we can fall for with this is I actually can't really afford to do that. And the amount of times I've heard people say, I'll give more once I'm earning more, once I've got a bit more margin and things like that. But in reality, my experience is that the more people earn, the less that becomes true. And Jesus actually taught us that it's being faithful in the little things that make us ruler over much. When we can learn to do this with the little that we have, we know that we will continue to do it because we've laid the right foundation in lives, and it will continue to happen even when we do have more. And I get it. There's times, there's probably people in this room that are just thinking, I've got kids, I'm just thinking about the clothes that they no longer fit, and how I need to just go and buy a new school uniform for them, and the rapid pace at which they seem to outgrow shoes. We've got 4 kids that seem to wear shoes for about 3 weeks, and then their feet are too big. I get it. There's people in the room, students, you don't have a solid income, you don't have an abundance of money, and you just think, well, I'm just trying to scrape by meals each week. And, it can be, in those times, it can be difficult to think, how do I handle this? How do I actually live out generosity when I'm in that place? And the good news is that, as I said, it's not actually about the amount that you give. It's just about looking for opportunities to consistently and intentionally live it out. Generosity, it can be a financial thing, but there's actually so many other ways that we can live out generosity. Maybe it's actually something that you've already got that you can give away, an item of clothing or something like that. Maybe it's that you can let someone borrow your car. Maybe it's a case of cooking a meal for somebody. Maybe it's more giving some of your time. Maybe you've got skills that can benefit other people, and you can be generous with those things. It doesn't have to be these big acts of generosity. In fact, actually, as I said, it's often the smaller, more consistent, more frequent acts of generosity that create this positive effect in our own lives. So my encouragement to all of you, as you grow in generosity, is to start small, do it intentionally, and do it frequently. Start small, do it as often as you can, and be intentional to look for ways that you can be generous to others and bless them. And so that's what I want to challenge you to do as you go out this week. I want to challenge you to take £10 and throughout your week, ask God who you can bless with that £10. Just look for ways that you can just find a need and just bless somebody, or just administer God's love and compassion towards somebody through £10. And I encourage you actually to make it even more fun by doing it in a way where they don't actually know who it came from. You know, when they're not looking, just quickly sneak a £10 into their pocket. You know, you can put it in an envelope and post it through the letterbox and run off so they can't see you. You can give it to a trusted friend who can pass it on to them. There's so many different ways that you can bless somebody without them knowing who it came from. And you can put a note in them, just sign it from Jesus. Let Jesus take the credit for your generosity. Ultimately, it all comes from him, and so it's his generosity anyway. Now, again, some of you, £10 may be a real stretch for you. You may be in a difficult place financially, and £10 is a difficult thing. That's okay. £10 is not a magical number. I just encourage you to pray and ask God, what should I give? And again, it could just be, he says a smaller amount. He may challenge you to give more. Or he may say, well, maybe you could give some of your time to help a student who's struggling in a subject that you are passionate about and you have knowledge of. Maybe it's that your generosity looks like cooking somebody a meal this week. Or your generosity means offering a lift for somebody who's got a long journey to go on and they don't have a vehicle. You know, there's so many different ways that we can be generous. And so don't fall into that trap of, I've been given this challenge, but I literally don't even have £10 in my bank account. I guess I can't do it this week. Ask God what you can give. Ask God how you can partner with him and experience the joy of generosity. Now, for others of you, £10, that actually may need to be stretched a little bit more. Maybe you're in a position where you can give more. And again, there's no magic number. I just encourage you to pray and ask God, what is it that you would have me give this week? And how would you have me do that? My desire, my hope, my prayer is that this new testimony portal that we have added to our website, where you can go and just put testimonies on of things that God has been doing in your life. My hope is that this week it gets flooded with stories of how God has blessed you with a gift from someone else in this church, or how you yourself have been blessed as you have given away to somebody else. So my encouragement to you is to go to our website and actually let us know how you have been living this out this week. But here's the challenge. Just go and take that £10 or whatever it needs to be and be intentional to find a place where you can sow it into somebody else's life. And then I encourage you to take it and do it again the next week or something similar. And then do it again the next week or something similar. Until it becomes a part of who you are, it becomes a part of your mindset, and your focus has shifted to how you can actually seek to bless other people, to where that we become that kind of person that, like Joseph, is willing to give away what we have because we want to partner with what God is doing and receive his blessing. So that's my challenge for you this week. So we're going to close, and I'm going to pray. And as I pray, I'm just going to give this over to Jesus, and I encourage you even just to take a few moments as I'm praying. You can pray yourself and ask God, what is it that I need to give this week? And who can I do that to? So let's pray, and then we're going to go into worship. Jesus, we thank you that ultimately everything is yours, and everything we have is a sign of your generosity towards us. God, we thank you that you are generous in nature, far more generous than any of us could ever imagine. Jesus, we again just surrender our finances to you, our worldly possessions. God, we thank you for them, and we consecrate them to you for your purposes. And Lord, we thank you that you are a God who lavishes the fruits of heaven onto us as we are faithful to follow out your word. And God, I know for so many people that something like this is a real challenge. So God, I just pray that you would give them the guidance and the peace that they need and the courage to take that step of faith. Lord, I pray that you would speak to every one of us as to what that act of generosity needs to be. Father, would you make us a people that creates a community where there is no need, because you have administered your provision, your justice, your compassion through your people. Give us eyes to see the needs, and give us a heart to be compassionate towards them. Father, I pray that we would see a lasting fruit in our lives, one of deep contentment and joy as we experience your kingdom. In Jesus' name, amen.